Is the open stage, which is just downstairs, and there we've got entrepreneurs, startups describing their companies and their ideas, and you're able to sit with them. It's actually a very small, cozy stage, and you can ask them questions, have a direct conversation with them. Or around the corner, you can go to our power stage. We're offering about 20 workshops this week, and we want to punch that all week. You can go in, you don't have to register or anything. You can go in and take part in the workshops. That's going to be on offer the entire week. Also, for our viewers on live stream, we know you're out there. We've been getting lots of messages on Facebook and Twitter from you. Just want to remind you, you can follow us on Facebook at CBIT Global Conferences, and our hashtag is CGC13. That's where you can send questions. You can send questions for our keynote speakers. If we have time, we ask those. If not, you know, we apologize for that. It depends on our time schedule. We're about to have a panelist discussion, and so we ask you to send your questions in for that as well. That's going to start in just a few minutes. So let's move on then. The energy sector, which we just heard about, is just one area that could benefit from a more intelligent infrastructure. Healthcare, transportation, education, public administrations are also prime candidates for smart solutions when we talk about infrastructures. Well, we'd like to spend the next 45 minutes discussing what solutions are available today and how realistic our plans for an intelligent infrastructure future are. So, with that, I'd like to call our four guests onto the stage now, and I hear that they are ready to come out. So, gentlemen, if you would come out, please. All right, hello, gentlemen. Take a seat here at our new Global Conferences bar.
Any order?
Yeah, wherever you want. There's no seating arrangement. As you see right there, I know someone had asked if we were going to have name tags. We decided this year, in the interest of the environment, not to print name tags. They're all up there, so you can see them. All of you bring an interesting perspective when we're talking about infrastructures. You're all either from the energy sector, IT services sector, from the government, from public administration, or from the transportation sector. So let me just begin by going through the round here and asking you each, how intelligent would you say our infrastructures are at the moment? We hear about that all the time, so give us a snapshot of where we are right now.
From the transportation sector, I would say, if I would compare to school notes from 1 to 6, 6 just to know is the worst one,
right.
I give it a clear 5.
Oh, okay. All right, well, that's a great way to start the discussion. Okay, so we're barely passing.
We are barely passing because there is an asset, the roads we have in Germany, quite tremendous extended network, but it's just starting that IT is being used to make more of the scarce resource on the long term. We are just starting to do these approaches. You jump into traffic jams without knowing. Normally you sit in the car, get the information when you're in the jam. So a lot of things can be done with more IT intelligence in a vehicle, as well as in the communication between vehicles.
Okay, but so you're saying the IT, the technology is there.
Yes.
But there's something else that's keeping it from being implemented to improve transport.
Yeah.
All right. And if I can read between the lines there, it probably has nothing to do with transportation. It may have to do with governments.
It does not only, on the one side, it's political decisions. That's for sure one aspect. But it's also a behavioral change necessary with the consumer.
Okay.
So also the consumer has to accept what is the value, what do I get for it, do I get... For example, we are doing tolling. Is really, in the end, tolling on the long term, even for normal cars, a topic to say no way? Or do you not, at a certain point in time, what would be a value, a counter value for the end consumer to say, hey, it's worthwhile that I'm getting this service, I'm willing to pay for that, because I get perhaps real-time information about traffic. Okay.
That's a great topic. We could even do an entire panelist discussion about that, about getting people on board when it comes to paying to use the highways. Mr. Holz, what do you say? You're from the IT services industry. How smart are we?
Now let me pick an example from the healthcare sector. So in Germany, as you know, we are going to implement the health card, so which is quite an ambitious undertaking. And I think the network which is established as of today is just a very fundamental base. And I think that was purposely done or consciously done because all the added value which the network could provide is not there yet. And I think here are many reasons why it is not there. Definitely not the technology reason. It's more that you can imagine an area like healthcare with ethics, with security. The society needs to have a consensus how to elaborate how smart networks should be, could be, and I think this is a constraining factor in this specific network area.
Okay. What about you, Mr. Archer? You've come to us from the other side of the planet. How smart is the infrastructure in Australia?
Well, I guess it's getting better very quickly right now. I guess to set the context, 10 years ago, our social welfare agency, Centrelink, embarked on turning on online services for the first time, and there were 4 transactions, literally just 4 transactions made available in 2002. Today, there are hundreds of those. And the growth has been phenomenal. There are now 50% of transactions done with customers through online. So it's quite a radical growth. But if you look back 10 years ago, most of those transactions had to be handcrafted around very, very limited bandwidth and not very intelligent networks. Today, the government's investing in a national rollout of broadband with fibre to the premises, and we're already seeing some of the benefits to citizens and to businesses as a result of that. So in some ways, we're seeing the intelligence shift from the back end, where the creators of IT systems have had to do workarounds to address those limitations, to where I think the intelligence is now starting to appear as we roll out the national broadband network.
Okay, we're going to talk about that, the rollout of that in just a second. And Mr. Wulf, what do you think?
Yeah, there are actually two network infrastructure I would like to speak about. The one is the energy network, the other one the railroad network. The energy network is a bit a two-sided medal. There's a lot of automation on the very high voltage layers. It's well supervised, it's well controlled, well measured. But everything below that, everything under that, there's no intelligence, there's no smartness in the network. There's no ability to measure electrical consumption in a household, for example. There's no smart meter rollout there. And this is the prerequisite for any smart application of using energy when it's available. We have now in Germany 25% of the total production volume last year was from renewable energies, which is by definition extremely volatile. So smartness is needed to use that when it's there. Because storing electric energy is still very cumbersome, expensive, or inefficient. A little bit different it is on the railroad side. Railroads have always been smart in the way that they've been protected, other than roads. However, the way this is being done is something of age now, so we need to go a step further to increase the density of traffic on existing railroads, which is not yet, by far not yet on a level where it should be. So we could use much more traffic on existing rail without extending them by putting more smartness in the operation of those. And that is certainly a big area.
Let me ask all of you as well, when we're talking about increasing the smartness of infrastructures in all sectors, do you find yourself having the conversation over and over again, or maybe a debate about infrastructures still being a public good? There is always the discussion about privatizing infrastructures. We have that here in Germany. Or the government picking up the tab for improving infrastructures. Let's ask our man from Australia. Obviously, Australia has made a very bold decision with this rollout. Maybe if you could, just for our audience, tell us a little bit about the rollout and about the cost, the expenditures, also that the government's taking on.
So around 4 years, just under 4 years ago, the government announced that they would invest just under 30 billion euro in rolling out a fibre to the premises network for the entire country. Or such a 93% of actual citizens will get access to the fibre solution. The other 7% will get high-speed wireless via satellite or fixed wireless solutions. That decision was made for a number of reasons, not least being that there was very much a dominant commercial player within the Australian market at the time, and another smaller provider of network services. It was an opportunity to kind of reset the country in terms of its future for broadband access. I guess it recognised that access to broadband was profoundly critical to the future of the country, to its economy and its citizens. And the investment in the National Broadband Network was structured such that it was a wholesale service, and that all retail providers of telecommunications services, of internet, voice services, would essentially acquire access to that wholesale service. The government has announced that at the end of some years after the rollout has been completed, it will look to sell that asset. So it will eventually move back into private ownership. Mm-hmm.
But it is the impetus, though, is coming from the public sphere.
I think it's a reflection of the fact that there was an enormous demand for access to internet across the country. Reflection on the fact that Australia is very large. There was a different grade of service that was available to citizens in the rural and remote areas, and a desire to level the playing field in terms of access to broadband services.
Where did the desire to level that playing field come from? I was just in the United States a couple of weeks ago, and people are always talking about patches in the networks wherever they go, whether it be for cell phone service or even if it's the internet. There is no consistency and constant coverage anywhere in any of these consumer infrastructures. But no one's talking about the government coming in and taking on big expenditures to make it a reality for everyone. What happened in Australia to actually make that the case, that the government was willing to pick up the tab?
I think it's a case that Australia, historically, the governments have always looked to make major investments in infrastructure to support the interests of citizens. And there's an issue about equity of access as well.
Equity of access. You gentlemen here are nodding. You agree?
Now, maybe when I pick it up, I think it depends on the kind of infrastructure we're talking about. Mm-hmm. Again, coming to the example of healthcare, I think here the state, here the social society has the duty to set a frame in order to assure the right usage, avoid misusage, because healthcare is not a real market, should never become. So that kind of discussions, but I could imagine for telecommunication it is fully different. What I think actually we are doing here in Germany, as I understood, that is the investment of the private companies, or not? So I think that is how the balance between state or government investments and frames or private frames, it's very specific and depending.
Mm-hmm. Toll Collect, what's the attitude there? I mean, obviously, you work directly with the German government.
We have interesting discussions. Historically, there was the decision taken that tax money will be invested to do these needs. But I would say, over the long term, when I look at the funding situation of each of these national states, when I look at, especially in Germany, the aging of the infrastructure, to give you a feeling, more than 50% of the German highway system is older than 35 years. Where shall the funds come from? And I think the challenge is to generate acceptability in the public, to say something was until now for free. It wasn't, you paid various means, but I have to pay suddenly from a day X an amount to make use of something, which is normal when we go to France, which is normal when we go to Italy. But I think this is an approach we have to tackle, and we will be forced to tackle it due to the funding needs. And in addition, yes, it always depends which year you have. When you have an election year, I think someone will be on the tiptoes in avoiding these topics, but make these decisions, these calls at a later stage.
I mean, I don't want to talk about too much about politics here, but every time we talk about changing infrastructures, making them smarter, the notion of politics always comes into play. In Australia, you see that the notion, at least for the internet, it is a public good. There are countries where transportation is considered, the infrastructure is considered a public good. Mr. Wulf, what's your take on the philosophy debate about this?
Germany is trying to run a course which is as much private as possible, I would say. Definitely in the telecom field, where there will be no national rollout plan for fiber in Germany. It will be run by private means, with maybe a little help or support in areas where it's simply economically not feasible. Exactly, the 93% is also not by coincidence, it's simply because it will never pay off. Nobody can afford that. The same is being tried right now with energy networks, with the enormous rise of renewable energies in Germany, specifically coming from the north, because there's a lot of wind, the usage is more in the south, so there will have to be highways for energy transport to the south. And so far, it is all planned to be done privately. So there are guaranteed payback for everybody who is running those, so network fees, which will enable that. Let's see whether it's going to work. So far, I'm very positive. I think it definitely can work. The problem I see right now is more on the side of getting the acceptance with the population that new infrastructure has to be built, which is not always beautiful, to be very clear. But not so much on the means of whether this model could run or not. A little bit different it is for the production itself. I mean, putting large wind farms into the North Sea, whoever has been there knows this is a very rough territory, is a risky thing and will remain a risky thing. But it's all private money. There's no public money spent there.
Okay. Just wanted to say, if there's anyone in the audience who has a question, feel free to ask. Just raise your hand. We've got people with microphones. Our lights are really bright. It's hard to see all of you. In the back, if there's anybody, just let us know. Also on Twitter, if there are any questions, you can send it to us. It's the hashtag CGC13. Mr. Wulf, let me pick up on this question about energy, the delivery of energy here in Germany. With the current infrastructure, the way it is, do you see a bottleneck being created? Especially now when people are talking about the Energiewende, the change in energy policy, Germany's exit from nuclear power.
A bottleneck in terms of production is not going to be there for the next 4 years, but because there are a couple of still upcoming projects which will have to be finished and will be connected to the network, then the total balance will be negative, because there will be more outgoing plants than incoming, at least from a planning perspective right now. On the other side, the rise of renewable energies is so fast. PV, photovoltaic, for example, much faster than planned, or actually even wished for, to be honest. Also, wind is doing well. That overall, that is not so much the risk. The risk is something different. The risk is that energy is being produced in areas where people don't use it, or where they cannot use it because there are not enough people living. So what is needed is a grid, a network, which is transporting the energy to those places where it is needed. Wind in the south of Germany will never be as profitable in terms of production hours than in the north.
But that's because of the grid, the way the grid is right now.
The grid is simply lacking. So the decision to build the grid and to put this in the hands of the Bundesnetzagentur, which is the same agency who's looking after all kinds of network infrastructures, has been a very smart and correct one. But those networks have to be built. Otherwise, there will be issues, for sure.
There really is no country in the world right now that has an energy policy like Germany's. Obviously, exiting from nuclear power, Germany is the first in the world to do that. There are no models for Germany to learn from or to pick up on. That puts Germany in a unique position. You're actually creating the models that maybe other countries are going to follow. There's no best practice of lists out there for you to follow. So you know, our three Germans on the panel. Let me ask you gentlemen about this. Is Germany and the future of its infrastructure, energy infrastructure, is Germany in a good place right now or a bad place?
You want me to answer first? And it's honestly speaking, seeing from the side of a supplier for infrastructure, we're definitely on the good side, because lots of investments will happen, and most of them, as I said, done from the private side. So that's good. Obviously, existing business models, they're all under biggest pressure, even if not to say a big question mark. When you look at the balance sheets of the big energy producers in Germany, they are all in deep trouble, in deep problems, clear. This will not end tomorrow. It will take a while until the system is adapting to that. But there's so much opportunity in the system which has to be taken up. So I see this really rather more an opportunity than a risk, clearly. However, there is the general question of acceptance of energy price per se. That's probably the biggest popular risk. How long are people willing to pay more per year, per kilowatt hour for the electrical consumption than the year before? Is there a theoretical border? Probably not, but how far will this acceptance go? And if politically there's an uproar against a too high rise of cross-funding of renewable energies, this might bring enormous pressure to the system.
Okay, yeah.
I think what Germany is undertaking here as a journey, I think is a big opportunity for us to develop a business, a market, business models. What I'm questioning is how we deal with our balance between federalism and central government. Just to explain you, because also energy example, smart meters. Yes. I think since 10 years we know what we are able to do with smart meters. And in France, for example, we are managing for the rollout for 50 million households, you know, because they decided to leverage it, to do it. They have a state near-owned energy supplier, and so they do it. They just do it, so they make the technology available. And in Germany, I think we have maybe 100 pilots running. We have 1,000 municipalities finding business models. Is it the Stadtwerk, or is it the city, or what do you do? I think that is a question for me. Do we have time enough to answer and to find answers for these fundamental questions, and can have the luxury to have this federalism discussion, what we are doing actually right now. So that will be a challenge from my point of view.
You think we need more centralization?
I think for these topics we need more centralization. I think federalism, and we even need to look on the European level or global level. I think federalism for infrastructure, I think this time is gone.
As it's being, sorry if I'm interrupting, as it's being decided upon on the national grid, or at least let's say on the national HVDC lines, where the planning authority will be a national agency, not a state agency, not 17 state agencies. But he's perfectly right. On the other elements we're talking about, smart metering and stuff, there's nothing like this.
Okay. Mr. Kirchmann?
I fully share the view about this is an opportunity. First mover advantage, quite clearly. But we have to keep in mind, as was stated earlier, the social implications of the increasing prices. And the wish I have, if I would have one, is that the politics stand where they are, saying these are the criteria we have set, these are the prices, and there are not implications from the outside which cripples the decision. You mentioned the pricing issue.
Yes.
It could easily become a social topic. And therefore we have clearly, and I think it's fully appreciated to have this decision, and now we have to make the right steps to move ahead. And not suddenly to go back for whatever political reasons to say this one, this one, this one, for the sake of an election. I mitigate.
But that's what always comes up, right? When we're talking about smarter infrastructures, it's always a political discussion as well. Mr. Archer,
I think there's an interesting parallel in relation to the approach we're taking with the NBN. You know, it's quite logical that if you have limited capital resources, whether they are in the state's hands or they're in commercial hands, that you want to make the best use of those capital resources. And it doesn't make sense for, you know, a substantial number of commercial players to be chasing the same opportunities and with parallel or duplication or triplication of infrastructure, because that's, you know, where the population is, and then have substantial you know, portions of the population underserved or not served at all. So I think that there is a time and a place for this sort of approach.
Okay, we've got, I've been told we've got a couple of questions on Twitter. Let's pull up one here from Frank. He's asking, would you say that we need more regulatory efforts to push the Energiewende, the change in energy policy in Germany? More regulation. What do you gentlemen say to that?
I think there's already a lot of regulation. For my taste, it's already a little bit too much. There's actually right now a little bit too less market inside. So I would not ask for more regulation. I think there's ample room for letting creativity flow. We should not hamper that by putting too much of regulation there, my view.
And you don't see regulation standing in the way of this model that Germany's creating right now in terms of providing a smart energy infrastructure?
I wouldn't go as far that it's standing in the way, but it's the framework which has been set, or the definition which has been done, talking about smart meters, for example. We have discussed, Mr. Holz, for 3 years for the so-called security profiles on smart meters. Now we have done them. Now let's go. Let's implement them. We don't need to discuss this any longer. I think we have certainly the toughest, the strictest, and the most advanced security profiles of any smart meter definition in the world. So, but now let's go ahead. So no more regulation on that.
What do you say, Mr. Holz? Are you in the no more regulation camp?
No, I cannot really say this. I do believe, again, that there's a need for regulation. Again, societies needs to be protected, and we have to achieve something here. So I think it's really the balance. The point I made before was, in this situations, is federalism still the right way for us? That I would question, but I would, in principle, say that regulation is a need, and it could be even a strength in order to give the right frame for the framework, for the infrastructure, in order to develop in the right direction. So I would rather say I'm in favor of regulations, but it's always a question of balance. And
you work for Atos. You're responsible for Germany, but your company obviously is involved all over the globe. Is there a country, is there an economy that you could point us to say they've got the right balance when it comes to putting as many intelligent features into their infrastructures as possible? Who's got it right now?
Also, it depends where you are looking. When we just stay with with the energy, I cannot judge it. I say I just took the example of smart meters, and say, okay, here I think obviously Germany is far behind, and I think smart meters could be a precondition to have a smart grid which enables us to manage this energy change. So there I think we could become faster and smarter, learn from more centralized governments. Otherwise I would not think, or I have no example yet.
Let me ask you, you had mentioned healthcare earlier. Is there a country where you say they've got the right combination now? Their healthcare infrastructure is where it should be for becoming more intelligent?
I think here are some of examples. I think in healthcare specifically, Germany is, I would say, catching up. I think when you see in the Northern European countries how they developed, or even Austria, which I think has a much advanced infrastructure here. I think Germany is catching up. It is now, was a smart move with getting all the discussions with data protection and so on out of this healthcare net, healthcare card. I think now they have the Trojan horse, so to say.
The Trojan horse, yeah.
Which now I think gives now enough space to let the different stakeholders see and the different application and value services develop. I think we will catch up soon. That's my opinion.
Okay, Mr. Kirchmann.
Let me add one thing to the thing of do we need more regulation?
Yes.
I think we might say pro-con for that. We should also look on the word called harmonization. Of course, from the perspective in Germany, we could always say, let's regulate, let's regulate. We have to see what is doing France, what is doing the Netherlands, because we have to harmonize at least on a European scale, because power is going across Europe. Transport is going across Europe. You're the lucky one. Australia.
Right.
But overall, you have to say, we also have to keep an eye on the harmonization approach. Second point you mentioned, do we have some examples? And I gave you an example. Yes. And I put on purpose Germany, because the Germans have the tendency to put their glass normally half empty.
Yes.
The Germans could have had to make the decision at one time to sell their highway network, and they said, we don't sell it. We put a billing system on top of it.
Their highway network.
Their highway network,
okay.
And we put a billing system on top of it and keep it. And that's why
you're here.
Why I'm here. Exactly. And with that, they generated 30 billion and came out of this, I would call it nasty discussion in public. You sell our core asset, the roads. We as a consumer have paid for via taxes anyway.
Right. So the consumers are being asked to pay twice.
In their mind, it would have meant. And there we come back to the point of acceptability.
Asking the consumers to accept having to pay twice. When it comes to transportation.
For them.
I mean, it is an interesting discussion, isn't it, when we talk about intelligent transport infrastructures. You're talking about augmenting what's already there. Well, what's already there in most places has been paid for with public money. Yes. And
not in all countries.
Not in all countries.
France, Italy, these countries have done the private investment scheme at that time. Why? Because at that stage, in the 60s, they didn't have the money.
They didn't have the Euro crisis either.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
So in a lot of countries now, you're asking people to take an infrastructure that is there, and you're asking them, okay, we have to improve it or else we're going to have serious problems. And you're asking them to help finance that. Then who does the best job of creating this acceptability, this acceptance in society? Who do you gentlemen think does that? Is it someone like Mr. Archer, who's from the government, who can stand on his soapbox and preach that from the government, or does it have to come from the private sector?
I would say we would make ourselves life too easy saying, welcome to the government. I think it's also the task of us, and that's the reason why we're sitting here, to discuss that, to say we have to create awareness, to say things have to change.
I mean, things have changed. I mean, your title, Mr. Archer, I think is very interesting. But when I was doing research on you, if you put Glenn Archer in Google or whatever search engine you use, the first three letters come up are CIO, which is Chief Information Officer, correct?
Yes.
Now, that is not a title that you find usually in a government. You just don't. And I think that in itself maybe says something about the attitude that the Australian government takes when it's looking at its infrastructure, the smartness of its infrastructure, and treating it and communicating its ideas to the public. Would you agree with that? I mean, are you running information and your infrastructure? Is it being run like a company would run it?
So the title of Chief Information Officer has been around for quite some time, and it's usually now applied to the individual who is in charge of IT within a large organisation. In the context of what I do, I'm responsible for whole of government policy and strategy, and I've provided advice to the government on major investments. So we essentially assess proposals coming forward from departments and agencies around how, and advise the government on how best to allocate its resources. So that, I guess getting back to the title, yes, I think in my previous CIO roles, they've been very much around how to, have also included how we need to manage the information assets and resources of those departments, both to make good use of them, to protect the interests of government in the context of those assets, to protect the interests of citizens often in terms of privacy issues. So the CIO is often integrally involved in all of those components. To look at how you use those data assets more effectively to deliver good government policy, and if that's around how you target your social welfare programs, your health programs, your education programs, often it's the CIO who's called on to provide some guidance or information about how successful was the previous program, did it actually achieve its desired outcome, and where should we be going next? Where are there groups of citizens who are being poorly served in relation to health or education? So that word information is quite, I think, insightful.
Yeah, I would agree. We've got another question on Twitter here. I've been told, why is the industry not forcing smart solutions more? I get the impression that they only see it as something that's nice to have. There we're with you again, Mr. Kirchmann. I mean, it's just nice to have, right?
I think for us it's always the case, where's the business case behind it? First part, do we have a business case? Then do we have the right frame, the political set frame, saying, okay, this is the playground I can play on? And is there a willingness to do things? We have heard about the healthcare topic. We have heard about the power, and I think there are a lot of business opportunities we can go for. Smart metering, being on the car, pay as you drive, or in a truck as we have it nowadays, even with pollution recognition, saying who a stinker pays more than others. This is there, but I think to, in the end, say, okay, let's go for it, requires money. And you have to make the right calls in that moment to say, if you put the money in that pocket, you have to decide not to put it in this pocket. And the impression you could have right now is everybody keeps his money a little bit together. There we are back to the funding exercise.
Yeah. I mean, we are in the age of austerity here in Europe, right? Well, maybe you're not in Australia, but...
Not so much in Germany, I would say. Either, yeah. Not really.
No. Not really.
No. Not in Germany.
Right.
But answering that question, I think when I look at two examples, there is a very, very nice startup scene in that smart solutions environment, however far you put the framework. When you just look at how many ideas are coming up, and on this fair, CeBIT, you will see a lot of that. I don't see that the industry is not pushing solutions out now. Yes, we are in an early market, and not everybody will be successful, or not every standard is there yet, for sure not. So standardization will be an issue, of course. There's the framework which Carsten was just talking about. This is simply needed. But whenever startup money is going into new areas, they go for things where it's bristling, where chances are there, clearly. Also on the industrial side, when I look at our own company or at our competition, there's a lot of investments happening in that area. And I'm not so negative on that end. It is yet the case that we do not yet have a very large market. Yes, but the market, I'm sure, will be created and will be helped even by industries which we haven't even touched upon so far, like the consumer electronics. They will drive for it. They want it. For the TV industry, I think it's probably a death question, or you can put it a life question, however you want to put it. They need something in addition to what they do right now. I clearly see a large push coming from that.
The demand for something new, for something smarter, is always there when you're talking about consumer electronics. But that is interesting. The demand for consumer electronics, consumer gadgets is always there. We take it as a given that the demand is always there. But we're not talking about in that same term when we're talking about infrastructures, are we?
I think the difference is now that with the consumer really dictating to the industry, it's driving governments and larger purchasers of technology in a direction that we perhaps in the past aren't as comfortable with. The whole consumerisation theme is, in fact, I think, gathering speed. So governments are no longer in a position to kind of dictate to IT vendors about how they will build, the latest gadget. We will make use of consumer products. We will, and often that's quite valuable for us. We have to cope with our staff and our citizens and businesses choosing to use consumer products. So that has changed the dynamic quite a lot in terms of government and how we build and support new IT.
And also when it comes to the government financing, R&D, for example, a lot of the drive that's coming, as you're saying, is coming from outside the public sphere. So the government is becoming more than ever also a consumer. Wouldn't you say? I mean, is that the feeling also here in Europe?
For sure, especially due to these funding constraints. And let me bring one more example. Let's take a time travel, go back to 1990. Just imagine at that time about such a device. This was done by the private sector. For example, the whole development, when we see nowadays, we have a mobile telephone. 1990, we could choose between a red telephone, a yellow telephone, I don't know, 3 kinds of colors, and that was it, fixed line. Yeah. And how the thing developed from SIMs you can send, SMSs you can send. Nowadays you have your all emails with you. How things did develop. Where I'm going at is, we don't have these big banks, these seeable big banks. But as you earlier said, a lot of startups are there. They are working, and yes, we are not up to 40 million customers at these ones, but they will have to develop. They have to mature.
Did you have a mobile phone in 1990?
No, I didn't.
I was about to say, you would have been one of...
I would have been a rare species at that time.
Yeah, you would have. You would have.
And you would have had a strong arm.
Yeah, he would. Let's, Mr. Holz, let me ask you about this too, about then the public sphere being the consumer, the governments being the consumers here, that change. Would you agree that that's what we're seeing, and where would you see it, where would you say it's strongest?
Honestly, I'm not really, as this term public or government becomes the consumer, I'm not really tangible to me.
The government, instead of the government investing in R&D, the government driving the creation of something, instead of that happening, now you have from the outside private companies, the commercial sector offering services and technologies and almost dictating to governments, this is what is so smart, you have no choice but to take it.
And I think that should be the way, because that is not the role of governments to have R&D and develop smart infrastructures. I think that needs to come from the economy, the society, the ideas. And again, government then has an important role to have the right balance between liberalism, regulatory, and so on. And actually, I think our infrastructure is already quite smart. It again depends, but when I see now in telecommunication and consumer electronics, so there's another attempt from this company with the fruit in the brand, where it goes to television and so on. I think it's amazing what's going on here. So I don't have the feeling that we are in Stone Age.
In the Stone Age, no.
Point of view,
Yeah, Mr.
I think another example aside from mobile phones is just the changes we've seen in terms of software providers. So, since you asked about 1990, in those times, it was very common for government departments and agencies to build their own HR and finance systems, and they carefully crafted those around their unique business needs. But today, with common off-the-shelf software, as it's called, or COTS, or commercial off-the-shelf software. The model is much more around acquiring capability from commercial vendors and then just configuring it to your needs. So, there's one very large German company that specialises in that. And I think that government benefits from that. We benefit from the investment in research and development of commercial providers of these systems, and arguably it works well from our perspective in being able to leverage a far greater set of resources around that sort of ecosystem, whether that's software developers or hardware providers or database providers. So I think there is a great deal of logic in moving away from that sort of government-built environment to this this consumer-led approach.
What do you say, Mr. Wulf?
I was just thinking about how this progression is being seen. I mean, the rollout of infrastructure driven by governments and their public use is clearly on the rise. So I don't see that there will be a drawback in the near term. So the push is so big that nobody will step back from that.
For the public, yeah, administrations to spend money.
They simply cannot. The question is how they're going to do it. So with the different models, and we saw different models discussing around this table. There are different models in the world, and there are probably different challenges, different speeds. But the general question, I think, this is undisputed, at least from my point of view.
Okay. We are almost out of time, so let me ask each of you since we're talking about smarter infrastructures, look into the future for us, and let's do something that's very tangible. Maybe look 2 or 3 years down the road. What infrastructure or set of infrastructures do you think we're going to see the most improvement in terms of becoming smarter? Where is the best example? Mr. Kirchmann, I'll let you start. And if you want to say the highways, you can.
No, I wouldn't. This is a long-term approach. I wouldn't be able to be drilled down to one. It could be energy. It could be because there's a lot of political pressure and private pressure on that sector, how to materialize that. Yeah. And I think it's always very much driven by public opinion, where to put the push on. So if I would make my bet on that one, that might be the direction. Highways is a longer perspective. When you ask about 2 to 3 years, I would say 10, 15 years. I have clear vision that we have pay as you drive at a certain stage, for sure.
And your vision for a smart highway infrastructure will be that when I get in the car to drive anywhere, I will be paying to use that highway.
Yeah, but in reward, you get an advice which way to drive, which one is the most efficient way, where are the traffic jams, how to avoid them.
So the trade-off is going to be I will pay, but my reward will be I will never sit in a traffic jam again.
And you want to get that guaranteed. Let me guess. Let me guess. You have a second degree as a lawyer?
No, but I know how to spot future politicians right here.
No, I think quite clearly you have to give a benefit to the consumer.
Yeah,
you just
obviously
can't sit there and say, pay, and that's it. You have to give him something in return.
I think all voters and consumers would agree with you on that, Mr. Kirchmann. Mr. Holz.
I think what we will see is more a kind of interoperability and integration of the different networks. I think it's not a question of an energy network or a question of telecommunication. It's a question of smart mobility, for example. Using car sharing, we have seen it yesterday, getting the energy, having the communication clear, the infrastructure, when to use, managing the traffic jam in this way. I think this will be the next wave of innovation and progress, so that we really bring this together. I think we are on a good way here.
Okay, very good. Mr. Archer.
Look, I think mobility is the word that was coming to my mind when you asked the question. I think we've just barely scratched the surface in terms of mobility as a technology. You know, we've been using these things for a couple of years now, but they've profoundly changed the way most business people work, and politicians. You know, we see them being used everywhere. But there are still enormous opportunities to further embed mobile solutions, you know, in watches or whatever, and in cars. And I think there are still a lot of problems in the mobile space. You know, coming to Germany, my phone works perfectly fine, you know, but I don't have a data service.
Right.
So there are.
Well, you could, but you have to change your SIM card, or you'd have to pay a lot.
Pay an enormous amount of money.
Right.
So I think, you know, that's probably a bit of an infrastructure issue in terms of how the planet is currently served. But I do think that mobility is going to change radically the way in which we work and the way in which agencies, commercial and government, provide services to citizens and businesses.
I think you've all implied too that this increased mobility and the smartness of mobile technology means that national borders mean less and less. All right, Mr. Wulf, you get the final word.
I would clearly vote for the big exchange happening in the energy network. Probably not so much visible for every consumer yet, because the smart meter rollout will take time, but the push for wishing to have better services in its private environment is one thing, and the sheer need of having a much smarter network there to control the volatility and flow of energy is simply needs that. So it's going to happen for sure.
Okay, good. Gentlemen, thank you very much for giving us your grades on the smartness of our networks and infrastructures. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
All right. Good.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks for driving so far. Thank you. Okay, that is going to take us to our next keynote address.